Hey guys, welcome to the Awakening Report. I'm your host, Doug Hamp. Today I'm taking your questions. This is your Bible questions answered. Always happy to do this. I think it's a lot of fun. So if you didn't, you can put your question in the chat of the YouTube. But I've got a big announcement. I'm pretty excited about this. That at the Way, we've been working on making an app for the Way congregation, and you can get that right here. So you can go to subsplash.com/the Way congregation /app, and it'll show you where to get that. You can just go straight to the Apple Store or to the Google Play Store. Either one of those will take you, and you can put in the Way congregation. Okay, the Way congregation. All right. The cool thing about that is that I'm going to be putting a lot of my material in that app, so you can access it really easily. And something I'm really excited about is it has a messaging feature or a chat feature, which allows our community to be able to connect with one another. You know, I mean, sometimes we kind of have the Facebook groups and we got other little things, but it seems like we can never really connect very well. So I'm pretty excited that this messaging or chat feature is going to allow us to communicate in a whole new way. And for this show, what I plan on doing is allowing everyone to have a place where you can put questions for this show, so they can be up during the week. If you think about it, you can put them there, and I'll get to those questions as well. So pretty excited about that. So check that out. You can also keep up with the latest sermons. If you want to give, you can do it through that as well, and more. All right. And it's only going to get better. So if it's a little bit rough around the edges, it's just launching. We're going to get that to that next level. So hang in there. Appreciate you guys being with us and all that. So why don't we get into today's questions? We've got a whole bunch that are just waiting here. Let's get into these. These are looking awesome. This is from Corden, Deuteronomy 5:8-10. I love to follow Yehovah and keep his commandments. However, if my father and his father before him chose to not keep Yehovah's ways, am I held responsible for any forms of that? Okay. Interesting question. Well, you know, according to Ezekiel chapter 20, the one who sins shall die. All right. So every man is accountable for his own sins, not for the sins of others. Right. So if I'm a godly man and I have a son who turns out to be wicked, well, that's unfortunate, but the son is held accountable for his own actions. Conversely, if I'm wicked and my son turns out to be righteous, then I'm held accountable for being wicked, and the son is not, who would be righteous in that case. So certainly we all have influence on other people, and we want to show a good example. And, you know, God, as the ultimate judge, will know how much influence each of us had on other people. And I believe that he will judge accordingly and absolutely fair in that regard. But I can say that each person is responsible for his own actions. And even though we are influenced by other people, case in point, when Satan convinced Adam and Eve to sin, they were held accountable, and we're all suffering as a result of that. But, you know, and then God promised Satan that there would be war between them. And certainly that is what has happened. But Satan has not yet been judged for what he did back in the garden. Well, you know, God did say you'll slither on your belly. That was probably part of it, I'm sure. But understand that there is still a final judgment coming for Satan and for what he did. So, but let's take a look at the text here, because you pointed out Deuteronomy chapter 5:8-10. So let's take a look at that. And maybe there's a little bit more there. So he says, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or what is in the water under the earth, you shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children of the children, third and fourth generations to those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. Ah, fantastic. Yeah. In fact, it's really interesting that when God first says this, he says it after this incredible declaration of who he is. And the Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children's children to the third and fourth generation. All right, so this whole question, this whole passage has raised a lot of interesting discussions, in that people feel that there's maybe something called a generational curse. And to some degree, I would kind of agree with that, but I have a lot of caveats, all right? So I've got a whole bunch of asterisks that you have to take a look at before we really go on there. So what I would suggest is that, God is visiting, that judgment is passed on to those other generations. Why? Is it because there's some curse on my life? Well, in a way, yes. And what's very interesting is that in genetics, we've discovered something called epigenetics. So epigenetics is information that is stored on top of your DNA, not inside it, not in your genes, but on your genes. And this is the kind of information that can be acquired or can be learned and then passed on to the next generation. So, the son of a great basketball player is more likely, not absolutely, but more likely to himself be a good basketball player. Somebody who is born into a long line of chefs will have a higher tendency to himself be a chef, right? So there's some good examples. Someone who's born into the family of alcoholics, if they were alcoholics before they conceived, then that child has a higher tendency to pass on or to take on that same trait. And that is true for a lot of things. And, I think sometimes our stereotypes, we talk about the Germans as being very orderly and neat, right? And so on and so forth. Right? There's all these different stereotypes. Some of them are true, some of them are not. But sometimes it's just, certain people groups have these tendencies, and those seem to be passed on. Partly they're learned, right? That when you're born into a German family, for example, then through the course of being nurtured, you're learning these things. But there's also something that's passed on epigenetically, so that there is a higher tendency for that child to have that particular trait. Again, it's not absolute, but it is something that gives a little bit of advantage to whatever that is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But there's a higher tendency in that area. And that's how I would understand that passage there in Deuteronomy, that the sins that I commit are going to more likely, there's a higher tendency, if they're habitual kinds of sins, not just a one-off, but habitual kinds of sins, especially where there's some kind of a learned behavior, then that has a higher propensity to be passed on to my children. So, I hope that helps, Gordon. That's a really good question. Okay, let's go to Jonathan Barang. Was Lucifer Satan a worship leader or angel that's in charge of music in heaven? All right, so Jonathan, that's a very interesting question. And that comes to us from Ezekiel chapter 28. And I think there's a misunderstanding here. It's not to say that he could not have been a worship leader, but the question is the evidence there that he was a worship leader, right? I mean, he could have had a lot of different things, but what does the evidence truly tell us? So I'm going to go to the ESV just to give you guys a different perspective. I grew up on the King James and New King James, so I often use that, but and sometimes it's really not the best translation, either of those. So, son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre. This is, of course, Satan. It says, you were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God, every precious stone, etc. And he says, look at all these different stones, right? And carbuncle and crafted in gold were your settings and your engravings on the day that they were prepared. All right, so that is what the ESV says. Let's take a look at the King James, because that's where this teaching comes from. And so it says concerning the workmanship of thy tabrets and thy pipes. Okay, all right, so I'm going to get to a little newer King James, because that's kind of crazy. Let's see here. Well, whatever tabrets are. Wow. Toof, timbrels. There we go. Timbrels, tambourines, or thy pipes. So that's how the King James dealt with that. Whereas the ESV, notice, it says the day of your settings and your engravings. So let's take a look at the Hebrew. This will really give us a much better sense of what is going on here. And you can see here in the New King James, the workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you in the day that you were created. So this is where this doctrine comes from, that he was the guy up there leading the choirs. But really, I think that's an unfortunate translation. All right, so we have here sorry about that. Hold on. All right, we'll go back. Okay, there we go. So we have tupecha and we have nekvecha. All right, so what are these things talking about? All right, so this idea here of toof is very well could be timbrel, tambourine. That's one way to look at it. But the word nekev is, look at a groove or a socket or a hole. This is actually the same word for feminine, for female. All right, so let's take a look. Remember this word here in the Hebrew, nun, kof, bet. Let's take a look at that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. All right, so God created man, Adam and Eve, right? He created them in his own image. And it says male and female, he created them. All right, so it says zachar, that's male, right? And nekeva, that is female, right? So that's the same root. Now, without getting really graphic here, but it's pretty simple biology, right? So the word zachar is something that's an extension, whereas nekeva is some kind of an indentation, okay? You can figure out the rest biologically speaking here. But that's the basic distinction, right? And, we even talk about if you ever do music and you have microphones, or you have male jacks, female jacks, right? And that's what we're talking about here. So that's what the word nekeva is all about. It's some kind of an indentation. It's a socket. And that is the same word that's being used in Ezekiel, that there was some kind of a socket. There was some female jack, if you will, that was installed in him. Now, this is not talking about sexual organs. This is talking about some kind of a graving, an insetting, right? This setting where something would go into it. And this is why I really prefer the more modern translations in this case, right? So you have crafted over your settings and your engravings here, right? I think the New English translation does a fantastic job with this. Your settings and mounts were made of gold, right? So again, there's that sense of what is going on in this text, other than Satan being the worship leader. Now, again, could he have led worship? Sure. And that maybe was one of his roles. But if it was, we don't seem to have a verse that would really support that. That's the basic idea. Now, let's take a look over at Isaiah chapter 14. And this is the other passage, of course. It's speaking about, let's see if I can do that again. Isaiah 14. There we go. Okay. All right. So you've been cut down, right? So all this stuff talking about something. So this might be something that gives us a little bit of a sense of what Satan was up to back then. Hell from beneath is excited to meet you. Let's see. I know there's a verse here. Hold on. Never mind. Okay. Also speak of you. Okay. And the sound of your stringed instruments. All right. So that would be one possible reading. The sound of your harps, right? So if you have harps, but do you also have timbrels and pipes, right? So this is the question. Exactly what are these harps? Well, other than just some kind of a musical instrument, it could be. It doesn't mean that he was the worship leader by any means. He may have had some musical quality about him, and so that would give us a sense of that musicality. But I really don't think that we can use the passage in Ezekiel 28 to support that, as many people do. Isaiah 14:11, maybe, possibly, but I think it's kind of a stretch to kind of make a whole doctrine out of this, even though I grew up on that idea that Satan was the worship leader in heaven, but I don't think we have enough to really go off on that. But if you want to check out my new book, I do talk about those things in detail. So if you want to check those out, you can go to amazon.com/DP, and then all those letters, B08Z1X3JVP. That's a lot of letters. But you can get there on Amazon, Corrupt the Image Volume 2, and I go into lots of detail about Satan's origins and what caused him to fall. It was a fascinating study. I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Thank you for that, by the way. That was a great question. Okay, this is from Breviary. How is it that in Psalm 91 it says that the Messiah will never get hurt, but in actuality Yeshua was crucified and beaten right before that? Some use this as justification that he never died. Okay, fantastic question. All right, brother, let's take a look at Psalm 91. You're absolutely right. That is a messianic psalm, and I think Satan was very clever when he used this. All right, because you have made the Lord your dwelling place, the Most High, who is my refuge, no evil shall be allowed to befall you, no plague come near your tent, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. You will tread on the lion and the adder, the young lion, and the serpent you will trample underfoot. Fantastic. Okay, so this psalm here, speaking about God's goodness, of course, and then we get to that great passage here. The Lord is your dwelling place. So the question here, let's take a look at the Hebrew. So that, so we can get a sense here. So no evil will befall you, nor shall any plague come near your dwelling. Well, but then as you point out in your question, it say that Jesus did die. Well, here's the thing, is that Jesus fully intended to die, right? He knew what was coming. Satan was using this passage when he took Jesus up in the 3 temptations that Jesus experienced. He took him to the edge, the corner there of the temple, and he said, okay, prove everybody that you're the Messiah. And he took him right to this passage. How did Satan know that that was the passage? Well, because Satan knows the Bible super well. He knows it very, very well. And of course, he was really trying to bait Jesus into doing something that he should not do. Now, what's interesting is this next verse here. He didn't read this one. You shall tread upon the lion and the cobra, right? So, al-shachal va-feten, right? This word peten is very interesting for cobra because it's related to the Hebrew word bashan, which comes from the Akkadian bashmu, which means snake dragon. And the whole area across the Jordan was known as the land of Bashan. Remember Og, king of the Bashan? So the Bashan is what it actually says in Hebrew. And that's talking, the literal translation is dragon snake or snake dragon, however you want to want to parse that. And we know what a bashmu actually looked like. We have depictions of these things. It was a long slithering snake with some, well, it kind of looked like little forearms. And that was just one of the many representations of Enlil, or Satan. So he was using this to try to set Jesus up. All right. And Jesus, of course, didn't fall for it. Now, I think part of the question is whether Jesus intended to die, and he fully did. In fact, that was prophesied at least 700 years before Jesus died, prophesied in the book of Isaiah chapter 53, also prophesied in Psalm 22. So he had every intention of dying. So the question then is, so that no evil will befall you. And yet this did not befall Jesus. He clearly knew what he was getting into. So understand that it's the intentionality. Jesus intended to go there. It didn't just, it wasn't just some random accident or he kind of made a bad choice. He was intentional about his choices, and going to the cross was his intention, right? So nothing befell him, but he chose to lay down his life. That's the difference. Whereas Satan used this own passage, the same passage here, to try to tempt Jesus to be a show off, to showboat who he was. Hey, look at me, I'm the Messiah, right? I can jump off the top of this roof and nothing happens to me because the angels, they will pick me up and they will keep me from dashing my foot against a stone so that bad things don't happen to me. But it's looking at it from a very different perspective. All right. So it's nothing bad happened to Jesus. Insofar as, it wasn't pleasant, let's put it that way. But it wasn't that there was some series of bad things that happened to him. But Jesus set his face like flint to go to Jerusalem to lay down his life. All right. Thank you, Breviary. That was a good one. All right. This is from JD. Is washing of the clothes in Exodus 19:10 similar to that in Revelation? Oh, that's a great question. All right. So let's take a look at that. Exodus 19:10. 19:10. And the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today, and tomorrow let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people. So they're not supposed to go up to the mountain. All right, and so then what you're referring to, I just happen to know, Revelation 22:14. Blessed are those who do his commandments. If we look at this in a different translation, for example, blessed are those who wash their robes so they can have access to the tree of life and can enter into the city by the gates. Well, and of course, there's a manuscript issue here. I won't get into that. But what's interesting about it is, and per your question, is there a similarity here? To come into God's presence, you have to be clean, not just spiritually. That is certainly important, but also there's a physical cleanliness, and the two really go hand in hand. That as you're clean on the outside, it's representative. It's good for its own right, but then it also should be representative of that inner cleanness that you would have. And so, yeah, I think you're totally onto that, JD, that there is a correlation between these two. And, part of it is that God came down and the people needed to be ready, right? God is this incredible power source, right? He's the source of all things, right? So here he comes with his, I don't know, what's the right word to express it, but kind of this nuclear, explosive, dynamic energy that he has just radiating out of him. And if you're not clean, if you're not physically clean and spiritually clean, well, we have seen what happens, right? When we are going through the Torah portion, Numbers chapter 11, the people began to complain. So there's that inner uncleanness. And then the fire of God broke out among the people. And that happened a number of times because there was sin in the camp. There was this spiritual uncleanness and possibly physical uncleanness that was breaking out. In fact, we just finished going through the portion where I'm trying to think of his name. Oh, that's crazy. I can't think of it. It's on the tip of my tongue. That's driving me nuts. But hold on. Numbers. Who's the guy that saved the day? You're all shouting it right now, but I can't hear you. That's the trouble. Phineas. There we go. Thank you, everybody. You helped me figure that out. Phineas, right? That guy. So, so there was an Israelite man and a Moabite woman who were having relations right in the presence there of God and all the people. And then this plague broke out among them. And it's almost certainly the same plague that we saw in Numbers chapter 11, where the people were complaining. And then this fire of God broke out. So you have to be pure and righteous before you go into God's presence. Otherwise, bad things can happen. It's quite explosive. All right, let's go to Jaron. He's got a question for us. No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. If Jesus hadn't ascended yet, how can he say he already has? King James even adds he who is in heaven. All right, well, let's take a look. John 3:13. I love going back to the source. John 3:13. All right, so I'll go back to my trusty New King James here. All right, so of course, this is speaking about Nicodemus, and Jesus questions him, are you the teacher of Israel and do not know these things? Most assuredly, I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. If I have told you earthly things, you do not believe them. How will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man, who is in heaven. All right, well, this does raise an interesting question. Okay, so I'm going to take a look here just at the New English Translation. So notice here that there's a textual issue here. It says most witnesses, including a few important ones, I won't read through all those, have at the end of this verse the one who is in heaven. A few others have variations on this phrase, such as who was in heaven, the one who is from heaven. The witnesses normally considered the best, along with several others, lack the phrase in its entirety. On the one hand, if the reading is authentic, it may suggest that while Jesus was speaking to Nicodemus, he spoke of himself as in heaven even while he was on earth. If that is the case, one could see why variations from this hard saying arose, who was in heaven, right? And then, of course, maybe the thing isn't there altogether. So this could be a textual issue. If it's a textual issue, then the whole, and he who is in heaven or was in heaven, it's just not there in some manuscripts. That is one possibility. But let's assume that it should be there, that it's supposed to be there. Okay. I think it's always a possibility that maybe it shouldn't be there, but it says that most manuscripts see it as being there. So two options within that regard. One says that who was in heaven, or he who is in heaven. Let's take a look at that again. And this time we're going to do a little comparison between the English and the Greek. All right. So hoon en to urano. All right. So the one being in heaven. All right. So yeah, how do we explain this? Is Jesus in heaven when he makes this statement? Or is he saying the one who was in heaven? Yet the Greek is pretty clear. Right? We got a participle here, the one being in the heavens, right? This is in the dative case, right? So it's pretty clear. It's not that complicated to understand that phrase, the one who is being in heaven. So the way you could understand this, a couple different ways. First of all, let's take a look at Exodus chapter 3. I think it's verse 14. All right, there we go. Nailed it. All right. So, and God said to Moses, I am who I am. And thus he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent you. All right. So notice here that in the Greek, the name I am is what? Ho'on. So now understand that this doesn't solve all of our textual issues, but it does raise an interesting question that possibly, and I believe Jesus spoke Hebrew, by the way, and he was speaking Hebrew at this case, but as this was then translated into Greek, that John would have rendered this in such a way that it would agree with what the Septuagint said about this, so that you have the same kind of language. I think that is, again, a possibility. So maybe he's saying, I am the one. I am, right? In heaven. I think the bottom line, because there's lots and lots of ways that we could parse this, and I don't want to bore you guys with all of the interesting, geeky grammar. But I think the bottom line here is it's really underscoring who Jesus is. Again, assuming that the text stands, which I'm going to go with, it's underscoring who Jesus is. He's not a created being. He's not an angel. He's not Michael. He's God. He is God. He is Emmanuel. He is God with us. He's the Word made flesh, right? There was this conversion from just being the Word to now the Word being made flesh. And we know that God is everywhere. God is omnipresent. So Jesus would qualify in that same sense as we understand this passage. So that's what I would go with. I would say that, the book of John is certainly more of a quote unquote mystical book. That we understand that it has these, by mystical, it means that it's explaining things that are not obvious in the flesh, right? It's not just the nuts and bolts of here's the history of Jesus and what happened, but it's giving a spiritual or mystical explanation of these different things. And I think this would very much be in line with what John is saying about the Word, right? The Logos, who made all things, right? So again, Jesus is not, he doesn't stop being God. He did lay aside his glory, but he still is God, was God, will always be God. And I think that statement there in John 3:13 underscores who Jesus is. All right, thank you. That was a great one. Wow. Okay, Breviary says, will sin offerings be required when the tabernacle is rebuilt in Jerusalem? All right, Breviary, so there's two different ways to understand that. Certainly there's one that we understand will be called the temple or tabernacle that the Antichrist will go into and will desecrate. And then there was one we call Elijah's temple, or not Elijah, Ezekiel's temple, spoken of in Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48. So I would say the sacrifices will be conducted in both of those. And even though the Antichrist, the son of perdition, is going to desecrate the near temple, I would say that it'll be a kosher temple, if you will. In other words, it'll meet all of the biblical requirements for it to be a fully functional, operational temple. And the one in Ezekiel's writings, the Ezekiel temple, that will be a fully functional, operational temple with sacrifices. Now, I know I can already hear you guys saying, wait a second, Jesus is the final sacrifice. And I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And this takes us back to a much deeper question of why sacrifices in the first place. We recall that God says many times, I don't require the blood of bulls. I don't delight in these things, right? So why the blood of bulls? It goes back to God being fiery. So we sometimes have to go back to the basics and understand who is God, right? He's the creator of heaven and earth and all that, right? But as you go through the Torah portions, you'll see that God is fiery. He's fiery. We just talked about that. That the plague that was going throughout the camp when the people complained, or when Phineas, drove the javelin through the couple that were going for it, and he stopped the plague. This burning, this fiery experience that was coming out from the Lord. Why? Because God is fiery, and we made of dust, and God fiery. We're not compatible with one another. So the question is, how can we hang out together? So God devised a system so that the worshiper could come near him. The word "come near" is lehitkarev. That is in the hitpael. The root there is the word korban, and you've probably heard about that in korban. It's in the New Testament. But korban is the victim. But the word actually means to come near. It's the thing that allows you to come near. So this animal that's being given on your behalf, as the worshiper's behalf, is the korban. It's the thing that allows the worshiper to come near. And what happens to that korban? Well, of course, it's slaughtered. And its blood, the life is in the blood, remember? And then the life, what does it do? It provides an atonement. The word atonement in Hebrew is kafar, which means to cover. Cover what? To cover the worshiper. Why would you need to be covered? So you can be near God. This provides a force field, if you will. It provides a covering for the worshiper to be in God's presence and not get zapped. That's the simplest way I can explain it. All right. And we see this really demonstrated that there were inanimate objects that needed to be atoned for as well. For example, the altar. Which the altar is just a bunch of stones. Why would an altar need to be atoned for? The altar never did anything wrong. So it's not a moral issue, but it's a practical, physiological issue, if you will. That the altar needed to be protected from God's fiery presence. If the area is not protected, what happens? Well, God comes down and his fire begins to scorch the earth. And that's what happened at Mount Sinai. When Jesus comes back, he's going to come back in flaming fire. And it's going to do what? It's going to melt the elements. It's going to, the mountains are going to melt like wax, it says, at the coming of the Lord, the fiery presence of the Lord. So this is what we're talking about. So the Ezekiel temple will have sacrifices going in it, and it will be for the people who have not yet put their trust in Jesus, or who have not really called on him to be their king. They have not pledged their allegiance to him, whatever term you want to use, but they have not been saved. They haven't gotten their new bodies yet. And that will be the purpose of the millennium, or of the millennial temple. All right. Okay, very good. Let's go to Delta Romeo. Genesis 47, 13, 21. When did the Israelites become slaves in Egypt? All right, well, we're told in Exodus that things are going okay, and then there arose a king who did not know Joseph. So we are not told exactly when that happens, but it certainly happened. Let's take a look at the passage that you quoted there. This is from Genesis 47, 13. All right, so Joseph is the one who really saved both the Egyptians and his own people. Right? So Joseph was a hero. He was an absolute hero. He was the guy who kept people from dying, and they loved him. The Egyptians loved him. And he had a very long life, and I'm sure they held him in great esteem for a long time. But as things go, right, those amazing people from so long ago tend to fall into oblivion. They can be forgotten, either because people just aren't reading their history books, or because people are like, I don't think that guy was so great after all, right? And so whatever the motives were, he was forgotten. And this new king arose who didn't like him, and he put the children of Israel into bondage. So we're not told exactly how long that happened. We know that they were in the land of Egypt for 4 generations, but when exactly they became slaves in relationship to that is not made clear to us. So, but it would appear that it was the last generation of them being there. In other words, the last 80, 90, 100 years that they were there, because it seems to be that same king. Well, he dies, of course, right? And then a new king is instituted. So however long he lived, and again, we don't know because we're not told exactly which king it is. There's some great theories out there. I won't go into those right now. But so it may not have been that they were slaves for the duration. I don't think that they were by any stretch of the imagination. But I can't tell you how long exactly. All right. Very cool. All right. So this is from Breviary. When has or will Israel get the entirety of the land from the Nile to the Euphrates? How can the lost tribes of Israel possibly inhabit the land if they are mixed in among the nations? Ooh, that's a good question. But it's a complex question. It's not just a yes or a little soundbite. These questions you guys are asking are fantastic, but I want you to understand, they're not just little things I can just check the box and we're good to go. But let's take a look at Ezekiel chapter 39. I think that's maybe the best place. It's hard to say exactly where the best place is, but God here he says what he's going to do in response to Gog and all this stuff. And notice what he says here. I will set my glory among the nations. All the nations shall see my judgment, which I have executed, and my hand, which I have laid on them. So the house of Israel shall know that I am the Lord their God from that day forward. The Gentiles, nations, shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they were unfaithful to me. Therefore I hid my face from them. I gave them into the hand of their enemies, and they all fell by the sword. According to their uncleanness and according to their transgressions, I have dealt with them and hidden my face from them. Now understand, he's not talking about both houses. He's not talking about the house of Judah and the house of Israel here. He's only talking about the house of Israel. Why? How do I know that? Because he says the house of Israel. Now he keeps on going. So let's keep reading here. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, now I will bring back the captives of Jacob. All right, so now Jacob is a bigger umbrella than just the house of Israel. Jacob refers to everybody. And he says, and have mercy on the whole house of Israel. So this is certainly all 10 tribes. Sometimes when he says the whole house of Israel, that could be a reference to both Israel and Judah. All right, it's not always 100% clear. And I will be jealous for my holy name after they have borne their shame and have all their faithfulness in which they were unfaithful to me, when they dwelt safely in their own land and no one made them afraid. When I have brought them back from the peoples and gathered them out of their enemies' lands, and I am hallowed in them in the sight of many nations, then they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who sent them into captivity among the nations, but also brought them back into the land and left none of them captive any longer. And I will not hide my face from them anymore, for I shall have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel, says the Lord God. Now, what's interesting, it's very interesting. If we go over to Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. Sorry, let me try again. All right, there we go. Now he's speaking about the house of Judah. Judah, all right? That's a very important distinction. He says, I will pour out that on the house of David and inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look to me, not on me, but to me, whom they have pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for the only son, et cetera, right? And notice here that he is not going to hide his face any longer. All right, so I'm not seeing it. It says it, but where does it say it? Okay, and he's not going to hide his face. I don't know. It's in there somewhere. I thought it was right here. Nevertheless, the point here is that God is not going to hide his face from his people any longer, both the house of Israel and the house of Judah. When will that happen? Well, of course, when all of them look to him. This will culminate and transpire after the time of Jacob's trouble. So, per your question, when will they get the entirety of the land from the Nile to Euphrates? After the time of Jacob's trouble. That is when they will get it. And we know that because in Ezekiel 40 through 48, where it's talking about the allotments of the land, it talks about all those different allotments that are spoken of there. I'm pretty sure that is in chapter 48. So take a look at chapter 48 and you'll see that it's talking about those allotments. But it's all going to happen after the time of Jacob's trouble, aka the tribulation. All right, Muriel has a question. Matthew 11:11. Among those born of women, there has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. What was Jesus saying? Wow. Okay. So, Muriel, Jesus is saying, look, as far as prophets go, if you kind of rank all the prophets, John the Baptist was pretty amazing. Now, you're like, well, I'm kind of thinking, well, Isaiah wrote some beautiful, beautiful stuff, 66 rich chapters in the book of Isaiah. If I had to arrange them, I'd say, I think Isaiah is better. But John had both the privilege and the responsibility of announcing the coming of the Messiah, to get the hearts ready for the coming of the Mashiach. So in that sense, he is the greatest among the prophets. But then he says, look, you may say, well, what hope is there for me? Because I'm not John the Baptist. I can't be like that. How can I be great in the kingdom? To be great in the kingdom is not about rank. So understand that John the Baptist is not going to outrank somebody because he was the greatest prophet. But the person who humbles himself and serves others, that person will be considered greater than any of the prophets, right? So it's not like, Elijah and Isaiah and all these guys, like they're going to be sitting up there above us, like I'm better than you guys. Not at all, right? So what that tells me is that I could actually be the greatest if I'm willing to become the least. And there's the rub, right? That means I have to die to myself. And I've had this conversation with the Lord a few times. I'm like, Lord, I don't feel like dying because it hurts. It hurts. He's working on me. So every one of us has that possibility, the potential to be the greatest in the kingdom, but it comes at a price. It comes at the price of dying to yourself, serving others before yourself, and then you'll be considered greater, even than John the Baptist. All right, thank you for a good question. This is from Dion. Can you explain Numbers 27:20, why God commanded Moses to give some of Moses' authority? Why not all authority? Shlomo, thank you. All right, 27:20, good question. Let's take a look. Numbers 27:20. All right. Okay. The Lord said to Moses, take Joshua, the son of Nun, with you, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Set him before Eleazar, the priest, and before all the congregation, and inaugurate him in their sight. And you shall give some of your authority to him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. All right. So you can see there in the English that the word some is in italics, right? So in the Hebrew it says, and you will give from this word hod alav. Okay, so you'll give from your something this. Right. So the word some is implied. Now the word hod is interesting. You see here it's splendor, majesty, or vigor. So it really, it's not the word authority per se. I mean, that's an okay translation, but the word to give authority to somebody is really to put your hands on them, and you're conferring something. So it's conferring some of this glory, really, to Joshua. Why not all of it? Well, that wasn't God's plan, quite simply. God used Moses in a way that he had never used anybody before, that he spoke to him face to face, and he did all these things quite directly to Moses. And I don't know God's reasoning for why he didn't want to do that with Joshua. I don't know. I'm not aware that he says that. I don't think he does. At least I haven't read it. So if anybody knows where it is, let me know. Yeah, why not all of it? He just didn't do that. And again, the word authority, I think it's a little bit misleading, because that's not entirely what it says, although I understand that you can go and check it out here. The word glory could be rendered majesty, vitality. The authority being transferred is both spiritual and civil. So it's this vitality, this authority, this splendor, right? So it's kind of the awe that people are looking on to Moses. Like, wow, this guy really speaks for God. And we're going to see that in the life of Joshua, that he just doesn't command as much of that awe, much of that glory, majesty, as Moses had, because God does not speak to him in the same manner as he spoke to Moses. He does speak to Joshua, and he leads him, and they do great things for sure, but it's not in the same way. And exactly why, I could only speculate, and I'm not going to do that. God doesn't tell us, so I'm afraid I can't tell you any more than what I know there, Dion. Thank you. All right, this is another question from, let's see. I'm Kirby the Best. What is the age of consent in the Bible? I don't know what you mean by consent. If you're talking about, I'm not sure. Are you talking about sexual relations? That seems to be what I'm gathering. Yeah, there's no set age, but understand that if that's per your question, that the girl was always under the authority of her father as a means of protection, so that she could not be taken advantage of. But people were considered to be adults by the time they're 20. We see that in the book of Numbers, as the men of war who were counted 20 and above, they were considered to be adults, and they are the ones that didn't get to go into the land of Israel. So 20 is the age where God considers somebody an adult. They're held responsible for their actions. In this upcoming parashah, we'll be looking at Numbers 30, 31, where it talks about if a woman makes a vow, and she's in her father's house, and the father has the right to annul that vow. And if she's in her husband's house, then he can annul that. So, yeah, I just don't know exactly where you're going with your question, so it's really hard to answer. But consider those ideas that I suggested there. All right, let's go to Dion. Is honey kosher or clean? What is really the word honey in the Bible? So the word davash is the word honey in the Bible. It is clean. It's just clean. They ate it without hesitation. All right, let's go to the next one. Thank you. This is from Sharon. Why did God ask Moses to make a snake to lift it up for healing? Snakes just always equate with Satan and evil. You're absolutely right, Sharon. You are absolutely right. Snakes do equate with evil. Well said. Well said. So this whole thing of where they are, they're complaining. Where are they the whole time that they have to, or when this episode happens? They're in the land of Bashan. They're on the other side of the Jordan. Again, as I talk about in my book, Corrupting the Image, the land of Bashan is the land of the snake dragon. This was Satan's land. He controlled that. It was also known as the land of the shadow of death. How do I know that? So glad you asked. Let's take a look at Isaiah chapter 9. And I'll go back to New King James. Notice here, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined. And of course, you guys know that Matthew 4:16 quotes this from the book of Isaiah. Here comes Jesus, right? He's coming from the land of, he comes here, the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. All right, so that literally is the land of the shadow of death. Let's take a look at again at Isaiah. I want to take a look at the previous chapter, Isaiah chapter 8. So God is telling the people, he says to both the houses of Israel, anyway, I keep on going here. Bind up the testimony, seal up the law among my disciples, and I will wait upon the Lord who hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Here I am, the children whom the Lord has given me, etc., etc. And he says, seek those, and when they say to you, seek those who are mediums and wizards, who whisper and mutter, should not a people seek their God? Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Wow. They will pass through it hard pressed and hungry. It shall happen when they are hungry that they will be enraged and curse their king and their God and look upward. Then they will look to the earth and see trouble and darkness, gloom of anguish, and they will be driven into darkness, the land of the shadow of death. So the whole episode that's happening in relationship to the people sinning, and then God has Moses do the whole bronze serpent thing, is because they're in the land of the snake dragon, who is Satan. Now, it's not that they're to worship Satan, not by any means, but a snake on a pole, guess what happened to that snake? It's dead. It's dead. It's been judged. This is God saying, look, I'm going to judge the serpent. The land where you guys are right now, the land of Og, of Bashan, of the snake dragon, I'm going to judge him and all of the sin that goes along with him. I'm going to judge it. And so they're looking to this. I doubt that they fully understood the great import of what they were looking at. But throughout the ages, it became something that God has revealed, and certainly he revealed it through Yeshua. So, snakes are evil, and God is saying, I'm going to judge the snake. Also, in the land of Bashan, yes, this isn't my new book. I can't help but tell you that because it's all in here. And let's see if I can find the picture. Hold on. I think I'm almost there. Let's see here. Oh, can I find it? That's the big question. I'm trying. Ah, yes. Getting close. Getting close. All right. Hold on. Hold the thought. There we go. Okay. So this is page 220, if you're in the book. So the guy there on top is Bashmu. Bashmu is the same as Bashan, right? So that is the snake dragon. Notice the picture below. That's a geoglyph of a snake, which looks very similar to Bashan, to Bashmu. Where is that geoglyph? It's right next door to Gilgal Rephaim, which is in the land of Bashan. Yeah, right. So just south, about 30 miles south of Mount Hermon. This whole land is the land of the snake dragon. So when Jesus came, he was doing battle against all those guys. Pretty cool. So it's the judgment of that snake, which takes us back to Genesis 3:15, right? That God says, there's now enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. That's this big whole story goes back to that moment back there where it all got started. All right. This is from Bree. Why does God not stop mass murder and genocide? Oh, wow, Bree. Yeah, I think we all hate mass murder and genocide. There's no question about it. But here's the thing. God made us in his image and in his likeness. And with that comes the ability to choose. To choose. And what's happening is all of us are making choices every day. They're often little choices. They seem minor, but the truth is that we're not dead center. We're not really where we should be. Instead of going straight ahead, the Hebrew word yashar, we get off a little bit, just a little over here. And what happens is I begin to justify my actions just a little bit over here, and you justify your actions a little bit over here. And then before you know it, these things begin to fester and they begin to grow until our society is not going straight, but we're now a little over here and a little over there, and they keep growing. And if we don't nip these things in the bud, then they keep growing until we get to the point of mass murder and genocide. So God hates those things. Let's be clear about that. He absolutely does. But he also hates the sins that I commit and that you commit. What's interesting is in Proverbs chapter 6, God says that there are 6 things, yea, there are 7 that the Lord hates. Let's take a look at that. He says right here, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift and running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. Wow. Now, probably most of us haven't done this one, I'm guessing. But you ever had a proud look? How about a lying tongue? Even small things. Hey, I'll be honest. I've lied before. Feet that are swift and running to evil. Well, I don't know. Or here, I forgot the wicked plans. Well, I hope not, but I don't know. Not all my plans have been totally on board and forthright. A false witness who speaks lies. Well, if I'm honest, I've probably committed some of that. And one who sows discord among the brethren. Well, yeah, I'm guilty of that one too. But what happens is it's easy for me to justify my actions. Say, well, it's different in my case, right? It's different in my case. When somebody else does it, well, clearly that's wrong. But when I do it, well, here's why I did it, right? And so I can rationalize, I can justify why I did that. And if I continue in those kinds of sins, then they begin to escalate and they snowball and they get into bigger things. And before you know it, I'm part of the problem instead of being part of the solution. So anyway, more could be said about that, but it's a big topic that you asked, and I just want you to understand God's against those things, but he's also against the things that we just read. And it's those little things that turn into big things. And so if God were to stop mass murders and genocide, should he just stop that? Or should he get to the root cause of it? See, we want God to just prune the tree, but we don't want him to get to the root of the problem. And if he really gets to the root of the problem, he's going to come knocking on my door, and he's going to come knocking on your door. It's not just the guys over there. It's not that other political party. It's not just those crazy people who believe X, Y, and Z. that's easy for us to say that and say, well, they're the problem. It's clearly, those type of people who are responsible for mass murders and for genocide. Turns out it's all of us if we really dig deep enough. Yeah, well, there's a lot there. Okay, this is that looks like a comment. Okay, Ruth asks, hola, ¿qué pasó cuando el tiempo se detuvo en la Biblia en Josué, la conquista de Canaán, y cuando la sombra regresó en el reloj de Acaz? Okay, well, first of all, time didn't stop, Ruth, just so you understand. So she says, what happens when time stopped or came back in the Bible? In Joshua, regarding the conquest of Canaan, and when the shadow returned in Ahaz's clock. So time didn't stop, right? I mean, time kept going, right? So, but the question is, how did the sun, from its perception on Earth, how did it do that? And of course, the Bible is not clear about that. I was hanging out with a rocket scientist some years ago, a guy named John. I forget his last name. I'm sorry, but he lives in Southern California, Huntington Beach, I believe it was. And he came up with a very interesting theory that I thought was quite brilliant for this very question. And essentially, it has to do with the spinning Earth. Yes, I keep this up for my flat Earth friends. Okay, but here we go. The Earth, it's spinning, right? It's spinning. It's going around, but it's also traveling around the sun. So as it's spinning, and then it's going in its orbit, right? It does its thing. But if the orbit were extended and it were pushed out and the orbit were made larger, then as the Earth is spinning, I'm not sure which direction. Yeah, okay, there we go. Okay, so as this is spinning and it's going out like that, and then it spins, if those happen simultaneously, so that you had the expansion of the circuit of the orbit, then from Earth's perspective, the sun would look like it is standing still. And he did something similar in the days of Ahaz. So that's the best explanation that I've ever heard. I think it makes a lot of sense. Whether that's exactly how it happened, I don't know. But time kept on going. Okay, it's not that if you had a atomic clock back then that would have stopped ticking. Not at all. It's just the sun was looking like it was standing still in relationship to the Earth's perspective. Okay, thank you for that. Boy, we're out of time, guys. This is crazy. Okay, I think we're almost done with the questions. Let me see if I can get to maybe one or two more. This is from Street. What's your take on the witch of Endor? Was it Samuel who appeared to her? Yeah, Street, that's an interesting question. I actually think it was Samuel because the data seemed good, right? The data was that, hey, tomorrow you're going to be here with me. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. And Samuel was kind of annoyed. Like, what are you doing waking me? Don't bother me. So I think the witch of Endor was real. I think she had real occultic powers. Now, I don't know that every witch is able to do that, but she was able, and I think she really did connect with the dead spirit of Samuel. And I think it has to be real for the Bible to say, don't do that. Don't practice necromancy, right? Don't go seeking the dead. In fact, we just read in Isaiah chapter 8 that people are going after the dead instead of the living. Let's take a look at that again in Isaiah 8. It says, when they say to you, seek those who are mediums and wizards and whisper and mutter, should not a people seek their God? Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? Okay, so what that tells us is that people were doing those things, and God's saying, don't do that. Don't do that. And again, where were they? What was the geographical location? They were in the land of Bashan. They were on the east side of the Jordan River, or the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And that's the land of Bashan. And that's the land of the dead. That's the realm of the dead. And so Jesus came and he was doing battle against the principalities and powers of that very area. That was Satan's stomping ground. That's his headquarters. And I mean, that's it. That's the land of the dead. So I think it's very real. I don't see any reason to doubt it. I think sometimes we have theologies, doctrines that say, well, this can't happen, but I don't know where or what we're really basing those things on. I know it says that it's appointed to man to die once, and after this, the judgment. Well, that's true. And I don't think that contacting the dead is your average daily experience. And I would also add to that more than likely, many of the people who claim to contact the dead may be nothing but charlatans. But that doesn't mean that there are not some people who are actually able to do that, right? Just because there are some charlatans out there doesn't negate that some people actually have that power, even though they should not use it. But the Bible is clear that you should not do that. Why? Because it's real. All right, very good. Let's see if I got one more. Let's see here. Okay. So this is Biblio 1:1 or something. First question, can you explain 1 Thessalonians, Google, can you explain 1 Thessalonians 4:14? Okay, I think that's the question there. Okay, 1 Thessalonians 4:14. Well, I will certainly try. This, of course, is the whole passage on the so-called rapture. Okay, so here we go. Paul is saying, I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. All right, so excellent passage. Let's take a look at the sister passage, the one that came before it, in Isaiah 26:19. Your dead shall live, with my dead body they shall arise. Awake and sing, you who dwell in the dust. Okay, so this whole idea of people who are dead, who are in the dust, who are sleeping perhaps, that the earth shall cast out. Actually, the word dead here is Rephaim. That's a whole different discussion, but we'll leave it at that. And it says, come, my people, enter your chambers until I shut the doors behind you. Hide yourself, as it were, for a little moment until the indignation is past. For behold, the Lord comes out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth will also disclose her blood. All right, so all these are parallel passages. They're both saying the same thing. All right, people who are dead are going to be raised to life when? At the coming of the Lord Jesus, not 7 years before it, but at the coming of the Lord. And it says, notice, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who are asleep. All right, so the dead will rise first, then we will be gathered. That's the word that he uses in 2 Thessalonians. Concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him. Let's take a look at that passage. I love it. It's a great one. Concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you. Right, so look, these are all the same thing. So the dead in Christ will rise first. Very clear. What we just saw. And now, if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. Okay, so first of all, Paul is giving people hope. Look, if your loved one died, look, Jesus died and he rose. They died and they're going to rise. Okay, so that's part one. Now, to come with him, we have to qualify this statement by looking at the other passages, which I just read in Isaiah chapter 26. right? It says, your dead will rise. Then he says, come, my people, hide yourself, as it were, for a little moment until the indignation is past, right? So whatever that means is not absolutely clear, but when Jesus comes back, he's going to shout. Dead people are going to rise up. That's going to happen first. Then we who are alive and remain, because he went through the tribulation, then we're going to be gathered as well. And of course, and then it seems that he's going to bring us, and then he's going to put us in some hiding place, because then he is going to fight against Satan and his forces. Where is that hiding place? I do not know. How long will we be there? I would anticipate maybe a few days. It's not clear, but it says for a little moment. How long is a little moment? Who knows? But it's not that long. So, I hope that helps, Biblio or BB Bo 11. All right, very good. All right, thank you guys. This is great. Hey, put in the comments if you like the 5 o'clock Mountain. If you like that starting time better than the 4:30, just trying out some different things there. So put that in the comments. Which time you like better? Do you want me to start at my normal 4:30, or do you like this better 5 o'clock? I'm open to either one. Also encourage you guys to go ahead and get the new app. It's going to be really awesome. So go ahead and check that out. If you missed this one, I'll have more notices so you can grab it, or you can just go to the Apple or Google store and just put in The Way Congregation. Look for our icon there, and you should see it. Of course, in case you forgot what our icon looks like I don't have it readily available. That's a bummer. I thought I did. Actually, there we go. That guy right up there and in the corner. Yeah, no, let's see. Right here. Yeah, that right there. So check that out. Otherwise, wait till next time. All right, guys, many blessings. Take care, and I will see you.